When Ivy Turner refused to sign away her inheritance, the land office went silent, and Hank Dalton stepped between her and the man reaching for her wrist. Dust rattled against the Redstone windows as Ivy pressed both palms to the disputed deed. "That signature is false," she said. Across the room, Silas Crowder smiled and ordered her removed. Then Hank rose from the back wall, tall enough to block the afternoon light. But he never reached for his gun. He only said, "Let her answer." Why would the quietest cowboy in Arizona risk his ranch for a woman he had just met? Stay with the story, and tell me when you think he made his choice. The stagecoach rolled into Redstone just after 10 on a dry July morning, leaving behind a cloud of pale dust that lingered above the street long after the horses stopped. Ivy Turner stepped down with one leather suitcase, a rolled blanket tied neatly across the top, and a folded envelope tucked safely inside her coat. The envelope had crossed half the country with her. It carried her late aunt's final letter, a copy of the probate notice, and a receipt from the county clerk proving that a parcel of land outside Redstone had been left in Ivy's name. For 3 weeks, she had read those papers every evening, smoothing the creases until she could almost recite every line from memory. The town looked smaller than she expected. A blacksmith hammered a horseshoe beneath a canvas awning. 2 boys chased a loose chicken across the street. Someone swept the porch outside the mercantile while a wagon loaded with flour barrels rattled toward the church at the end of the road. Life moved with the confidence of people who believed tomorrow would look much like today. Ivy adjusted her hat and walked toward the county land office. The building stood beside the sheriff's office, painted white years earlier, but now faded by sun and dust. Inside, the room smelled of ink, old paper, and pine shelves warmed by the heat. Several ranchers waited along one wall holding folded deeds. Behind the long counter stood Benjamin Foster, the town attorney, carefully arranging stacks of documents. When he looked up, his polite smile arrived half a second late. "You must be Miss Turner." "I am. You've traveled a long way." "I've come to claim my aunt's property." Benjamin accepted her papers without comment. He unfolded each document slowly. His eyes paused, then paused again. Finally, he looked toward the back office. "I'll need another party present." Before Ivy could ask why, another door opened. Silas Crowder stepped into the room wearing a spotless tan coat despite the dust outside. His boots shined. His silver watch chain rested across his vest. He smiled as though greeting an old friend. "Miss Turner." She had never seen him before. "You know my name." "I know most things concerning land around Redstone." He tipped his hat politely. Benjamin cleared his throat. "There appears to be a procedural problem." Ivy felt the first warning settle quietly in her stomach. "What sort of problem?" Benjamin slid another document onto the counter. "The parcel you're claiming has already been transferred." She stared at it. "The signature isn't my aunt's. It was filed 6 years ago. My aunt was alive 3 months ago." Silence. Benjamin folded his hands. "That is unfortunate." Silas stepped closer. "There are mistakes in county records from time to time." "I don't call forgery a mistake." Several heads turned. Silas never lost his smile. "The simplest solution would be for you to sign a corrective transfer. You'll receive fair compensation, and everyone can go home." "I didn't come for compensation. You came for land that no longer belongs to you." "It belongs to me." Benjamin shifted uneasily. "The official record disagrees." Ivy laid her own documents across the counter. "My aunt paid taxes every year. Those receipts don't change the filing. They prove possession. They prove payment. They prove someone altered these records." The room grew quieter. A rancher near the door quietly removed his hat. Silas rested one hand lightly on the counter. "You've had a difficult journey." "I have. You don't know this territory. I'll learn. You could spend years fighting paperwork. I've spent longer fighting harder things." For the first time, the smile faded slightly. Benjamin pushed a fresh paper toward her. Sign here acknowledging the correction. I won't. Silas sighed almost regretfully. You misunderstand your position. No. I don't think I do. He nodded once. One of the men standing behind him stepped forward. Large, broad shoulders, red beard. He reached for Ivy's wrist. Ma'am, he said quietly. Best not make this difficult. His fingers closed around her sleeve. Not painfully. Firmly enough that everyone in the room understood the gesture. Ivy pulled once. He tightened slightly. Benjamin looked down at his desk. No one else moved. Then another voice spoke. Low, steady. So that's how we're settling paperwork now. The words were barely louder than conversation. Every head turned. A tall man stood near the open doorway. He seemed even larger because he wasn't trying to appear so. Dust covered his boots. His hat shaded most of his face. He carried no rifle in his hands. No anger showed in his expression. Only complete certainty. Hank Dalton walked forward one slow step, then another. The man holding Ivy's wrist glanced toward Silas. Silas did not answer. Hank stopped an arm's length away. Let her go. Nothing more. No threat. No raised voice. The room somehow became quieter than silence itself. The rancher released Ivy immediately. Hank looked at him for another second before turning toward Ivy. Are you hurt? She rubbed her wrist once. I'm all right. He nodded. Then he faced Benjamin. Fine. If there's a dispute, let the court settle it. Benjamin swallowed. The records can be read. Silas folded his arms. You've taken an interest in county business? I've taken an interest in someone being treated fairly. Silas studied him. You know nothing about this woman. No. You'd involve yourself anyway? I already have. No one spoke. Outside, a wagon rolled past. The sound of its wheels echoed through the open windows. Silas finally stepped back. This isn't finished. I imagine it isn't, Hank answered. Silas collected his gloves, nodded politely to no one in particular, and walked out. Benjamin gathered the scattered papers without meeting Ivy's eyes. I'm afraid today's meeting is over. Ivy slowly folded her documents. She had crossed nearly 1,500 miles for an answer. Instead, she had found missing records, polite lies, and a stranger who had stopped an entire room simply by asking someone to let go. Outside, the afternoon sun pressed heavily against the boardwalk. She stood for several moments looking down the empty street. I don't know where I'm sleeping tonight, she admitted quietly. Hank adjusted the brim of his hat. Coyote Bluff Ranch has an empty room. She looked at him. I don't know you. No. I don't take charity. It isn't charity. What is it? A place to stay until you find the truth. She searched his face. There was nothing asking for trust, nothing asking for gratitude, only a simple offer. After a long silence, she nodded once. All right. They left Redstone together beneath the fading afternoon light, riding toward the western hills where the fences of Coyote Bluff Ranch stretched across the dry Arizona grass. Long after sunset, Martha Hale showed Ivy the small room beside the kitchen. It held a narrow bed, a wash basin, a wooden chair, and one window facing the corrals. The house settled into silence. Unable to sleep, Ivy stepped quietly into the hallway. A faint lantern still burned beneath the stairwell. One door stood slightly open. She looked inside. Hank knelt beside an old iron-bound chest. Before closing the lid, he carefully placed another thick folder inside. She caught only a brief glimpse. Dozens of folded deeds, survey maps, receipts, letters. Every bundle carefully labeled with the names of ranches across the county. Hank locked the chest, blew out the lantern, and without ever realizing she had been watching, disappeared into the darkness. Ivy returned to her room, But sleep did not come easily. The iron-bound chest stayed in her thoughts. So did the names she had seen written across those folders. Miller, Keene, Holloway, small ranch families she had never met, all tied together inside Hank Dalton's locked box. At sunrise, she found him near the South Corral, replacing a worn strap on a bay mare's saddle. His large hands worked with surprising care, drawing the new leather through the buckle without frightening the restless animal. "You keep land records," Ivy said. Hank did not look up. "I keep many things. In a locked chest. That is usually why a chest has a lock." She folded her arms. "You knew I was awake. I heard the floorboard." That stopped her. He tested the strap, then finally raised his eyes. "So, if you want to ask something, ask it. Why do you have files from half the ranches in this county?" "Because half the ranches in this county have had trouble with their boundaries." "And you help them?" "When I can." "Why?" Hank stroked the mare's neck once before stepping away. "Because most men discover what a signature costs after the ink dries." He carried the saddle into the barn, leaving Ivy with an answer that explained very little and somehow told her more than she expected. At breakfast, Martha Hale placed a plate of biscuits and salt pork before Ivy, then poured coffee into a thick blue cup with a chipped rim. Martha's gray hair was pulled into a tight knot. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and she watched people the way a careful cook watched a pot near boiling. "Hank says you know figures," she said. "I know enough to spot when they don't agree." "Good. The ranch books haven't agreed with themselves since last winter." Hank sat at the end of the... "They agree." Martha gave him a flat look. "No. You simply stop adding when you dislike the answer." A boy at the opposite end lowered his face toward his plate, hiding what might have been a smile. "This is Caleb Brooks," Martha said. "His father managed the cattle before the fever took him." Caleb nodded once. 14, perhaps, thin through the shoulders, with watchful brown eyes and a shirt mended neatly at one cuff. Ivy nodded back. "Do you read?" "Some." "Do you write?" "Enough to sign my name?" "Then you know where to begin." Caleb looked at her more carefully after that. By noon, Ivy had taken over one end of the dining table. She arranged freight receipts by month, cattle contracts by buyer, and feed bills by amount owed. Hank had kept every scrap of paper, but his system appeared to depend on remembering where he had last put something. She found a payment marked twice, 3 missing receipts from the Redstone mercantile, and a cattle buyer charging an unexplained handling fee on every head shipped south. When Hank came in for water, she held up the contract. "You have paid Mr. Larkin $86 he was never owed." Hank removed his hat. He said the trail fees increased. They did not. He changed the wording between this copy and the one you signed. Hank read both pages. His jaw tightened. "You're certain?" "I spent 2 years copying land deeds and commercial agreements for an attorney who believed one misplaced word could cost a family its home." She tapped the altered line. "This word cost you $86. Hank folded the contract carefully. "I'll speak to him." "Speak carefully. Men who change paper often prepare their lies before anyone asks." His eyes rested on her for a moment. Then he nodded. That afternoon, Ivy rode with him toward Dry Mesa to inspect the edge of her aunt's parcel from a distance. The sun struck hard against the land. Heat shimmered above the pale grass, and dust clung to the hem of her dark riding skirt. Her saddle began slipping before they reached the survey marker. Hank noticed before she spoke. He dismounted and approached slowly, keeping one hand visible so the mare would not startle. "The girth stretched," he said. "I can manage it." "I know." He loosened the strap, added a short piece of leather from his saddlebag, and tested the buckle twice. He never touched Ivy's leg, never reached across her without warning. When he finished, he stepped back. That will hold until we get home. Thank you. He placed his hat back on his head. You don't have to thank a man for fixing poor tack. Then you should not have given me poor tack. For half a second, something changed near the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. They reached the ridge above the disputed land late in the afternoon. Below them lay 20 acres of dry brush, scattered mesquite, and a shallow wash cutting through the northern edge. It did not look valuable. Then Ivy noticed the cottonwood. A thin green line grew at the bottom of the wash, where nothing else in the country held much color. There's water beneath it, she said. Hank looked at her. That is what Crowder wants. My aunt knew. She refused 3 offers. Ivy stared down at the land. The inheritance had never been about its sale price. It was about what lay under it. That evening, a cattle buyer named Jonas Larkin arrived at the ranch demanding to speak with Hank. He stood near the gate, loud enough for the hands at the southern camp to hear, waving the altered contract as though volume could turn it honest. Hank walked out alone. Ivy watched from the porch. Larkin was not a small man, but beside Hank, he appeared to lose some of his certainty. Hank did not crowd him. He did not raise his fists. He simply unfolded both copies of the agreement and asked Larkin to read the changed line aloud. The buyer refused. Hank waited. The silence did the work. At last, Larkin returned the $86 in folded banknotes and left without purchasing another steer. Hank brought the money inside and placed it beside Ivy's ledger. You were right. She counted it once. You sound surprised. I'm learning not to be. Their eyes met over the table. Neither looked away quickly. Later, Caleb brought a slate into the kitchen. Ivy showed him how to copy the words from a grazing agreement, one line at a time. He pressed too hard with the chalk and broke it twice, but he stayed at the table until he could read an entire paragraph without help. From the doorway, Hank listened without entering. Martha passed behind him carrying folded towels. This house used to sound like that, she said quietly. Hank looked toward Caleb, then Ivy. He said nothing, but he remained in the doorway until the lesson ended. 3 days later, Ivy opened one of the files Hank finally agreed to take from the iron chest. The first deed belonged to her aunt. The second belonged to a widower near Cottonwood Wash. The third concerned a family east of Dry Mesa. Different owners, different dates, the same witness, the same correction in the margins. And on every disputed transfer, the same name appeared beneath the county filing stamp. Silas Crowder. Ivy spread the pages across the table. This isn't one stolen parcel, she said. Hank stood beside her, his shadow falling over the documents. No. He has been taking pieces of the valley for years. That is what I was trying to prove. A floorboard creaked behind them. Caleb stood in the hallway holding a folded note. A man left this at the gate, he said. He wouldn't give his name. Hank opened it. The note came from Thomas Bell, a former clerk who had once worked inside the land office. He claimed he had seen Silas alter the original filings and would testify if Hank met him at Cottonwood Wash the following morning. They rode out before sunrise. Thomas Bell never came. His cabin stood empty. The coffee pot was still warm on the stove. His horse was gone, but his bedroll, boots, and wages remained behind. On the table lay a single torn piece of paper. It carried half a county seal and one unfinished sentence. Crowder knows where the original ledger. Hank folded the torn paper and placed it inside his coat. He searched the cabin without disturbing more than he had to. One chair lay on its side. A plate of beans had dried beside the stove. Thomas Bell's best boots remained beneath the bed, toes pointed toward the wall. A man leaving by choice did not leave his boots. Ivy stood near the window, watching dust move across the yard. He was taken, she said. Maybe. You don't believe that. I believe what I can prove. She turned toward him. And what can you prove? That someone wanted us to find an empty cabin. Hank lifted Thomas's coffee cup from the table. A faint crack ran down one side, stained dark near the rim. He set it back exactly where it had been. Silas wants us frightened, Ivy said. He wants us uncertain. What is the difference? Fear makes people run. Uncertainty makes them turn on each other. By the time they returned to Coyote Bluff, Silas had already begun. A letter from the Redstone Bank waited beneath the ranch office door. The payment on Hank's winter cattle loan had been moved forward 30 days. Another notice from Jonas Larkin canceled the purchase of 60 steers without explanation. The following morning, the feed wagon did not arrive. By noon, 2 ranch hands asked whether their wages were safe. Hank answered each man the same way. "You'll be paid Friday." He said it without anger. Then he went to the southern camp and helped mend a wind-broken fence himself. That afternoon, Ivy rode into Redstone for flour, lamp oil, and ink. Conversations lowered when she entered the mercantile. Mrs. Dunn, the owner, weighed the flour without meeting her eyes. At the rear counter, 2 women spoke softly enough to pretend they did not mean to be heard. A clever woman could come west with nothing and leave owning half a ranch. Ivy placed the coins down one by one. Mrs. Dunn wrapped the ink bottle in newspaper. "You'll want to keep that out of the heat," she said. "I know." Outside, Ivy tied the parcels behind her saddle. Across the street, Silas Crowder stood beneath the hotel awning with Benjamin Foster. Silas tipped his hat. Ivy did not return the gesture. Benjamin looked away first. Hank was waiting beside the gate when she returned. He took the flour sack from her saddle but left the smaller parcels for her to carry. "You heard," he said. "It appears I have become ambitious." His face remained still. People talk when they have nothing useful to do. People also act on what they hear. They'll tire of it. "Will the bank?" He stopped. The flour sack rested easily against one shoulder, though it would have bent another man sideways. "No," he said. "The bank won't." Inside, Ivy found Martha cutting potatoes at the kitchen table. The knife struck the board in a steady rhythm. "Silas closed Hank's credit at the feed store once before," Martha said without looking up. 6 years ago. "What happened?" "Hank sold 20 breeding cows and paid everyone." "And the ranch?" "Survived." Martha pushed the potatoes into an iron pot. "Hank always makes sure everyone survives." The knife stopped. "He just forgets to include himself." That evening, Ivy found Hank in the barn repairing a cracked wagon tongue beneath the yellow light of a hanging lantern. His sleeves were rolled high. Sweat darkened the back of his shirt despite the cooling air. She held out the bank notice. "So, you can't meet this payment without selling stock." "I know. Silas knows too." "Yes, you could challenge the notice." "With what money?" "I can draft the petition." He drove a wooden peg through the brace. "The filing fee alone is $12. I have 17. The mallet stopped. "No. It's my case that brought this down on you." "No. You don't get to answer every question with one word." He set the mallet aside and looked at her. "You came here to recover what belongs to you. You did not come here to pay my debts. And you did not bring me here to destroy your ranch. You haven't. Then why did Larkin cancel the cattle order? Why did the bank move the date? Why did the feed wagon never arrive?" His silence confirmed everything. Ivy placed the notice on the workbench. "If I leave, the pressure eases." "No." There it was again, quiet, final. She looked at the wagon tongue between them. "You can't hold up every broken thing by yourself." Hank ran one thumb along the new brace, testing it. "I've managed so far." "That is not the same as living well." His eyes lifted to hers. For a moment, the barn held only the sound of horses shifting in their stalls and the dry ticking of the lantern flame. Then Caleb appeared at the door. "Sheriff Cooper's here." Ed Cooper waited on the porch with his hat in both hands and dust on the knees of his trousers. He was a narrow man with a patient face, the kind of sheriff who preferred listening before reaching for the revolver at his hip. "I checked Bell's cabin," he said. "Found wheel marks behind the shed. 2 horses and a light wagon headed north." "Toward Redstone?" Hank asked. "Toward Dry Mesa. Lost the trail in rock." "Any blood?" "No." Ivy noticed the relief that passed through Hank's shoulders. Small, gone quickly. Ed looked at her. "Miss Turner, I need to tell you something else. Crowder filed a complaint this morning. Says Hank is interfering with a lawful transfer and harboring you to gain control of your claim." "Harboring me?" "That is his word." Hank leaned against the porch post. "What is yours?" "The word is foolishness, but he knows which men to whisper to." Ed put on his hat. "He's not trying to win the argument yet. He's trying to make you expensive to stand beside." After the sheriff left, the evening settled heavily over the ranch. Ivy worked late at the dining table, comparing the altered deeds by lamplight. Caleb sat opposite her practicing figures. Hank remained outside longer than usual. When Caleb finally went to bed, Ivy heard the kitchen door open. Hank entered carrying a broken bridle over one arm. A dark stain marked his shirt near the shoulder. "You're hurt. Scraped it on wire. Sit down. It's nothing." "Hank." He stopped. She had never used his name that sharply before. He sat. Ivy brought the wash basin, clean cloth, and a tin of Martha's salve. The cut was shallow, but the wire had torn through his shirt and left a long red line across his upper arm. He watched her rinse the cloth. "You don't have to do that." "I know." The answer made him look at her. She cleaned the scrape carefully. Hank held himself still, but not comfortably. The man who could face an angry cattle buyer without blinking seemed uncertain about where to put his hands while someone tended to him. "Did the fence break?" Ivy asked. "Cut." She paused. "Silas?" "Likely. And you still won't go after him?" "No." "Why?" Hank stared at the far wall. The lantern showed the old scar near his collar, pale against sun-browned skin. "Years ago, 2 ranchers fought over a boundary near Dry Mesa. I was asked to keep them apart." "What happened?" "One man drew a gun. I moved too fast." His voice stayed level, but his fingers closed slowly over his knee. "He fell against a hitch rail, never woke up." Ivy said nothing. "The county wanted to make me head of its range guard after that. Said men listened when I walked into a room." "But you refused." "I had already learned what fear could make men do." She tied the clean bandage around his arm. "That was an accident." "It was still a grave." His gaze met hers. "So I use paper when paper will hold, silence when silence will do, and strength only when there is nothing else left." Ivy finished the knot. For the first time, his size no longer looked like the source of his power. His restraint did. The following days tightened around them. A second buyer withdrew. The bank sent a clerk to count Hank's cattle. A rancher who had promised to support Ivy's claim refused to open his gate when she rode by. At Cedar Chapel on Sunday, the pew beside Martha remained empty even after Ivy sat down. People who once greeted Hank with a nod found reasons to examine their hymnals. Hank stood beside Ivy through the entire service. He did not touch her. He did not look around. He simply remained. That night, Ivy packed her suitcase. She folded each dress carefully, wrapped the ink bottle in the same newspaper from the Mercantile, placed her aunt's letter between 2 shirts so it would not crease further. She left no note. A note would invite an answer. Before dawn, she led the mare quietly from the stable and took the southern trail toward Cottonwood Wash. The sky was beginning to gray when she heard another horse behind her. Hank did not call out. He rode until he was level with her, then slowed. Neither spoke for several yards. Cottonwood leaves moved above the shallow water, silver underneath in the early breeze. "You're going east," he said. "Yes. Redstone is north." "I'm not going to Redstone." "I know." She kept her eyes on the trail. "The bank will ease off if I'm gone." "Maybe. The buyers may return." "Maybe. Caleb keeps his home. Your hands keep their wages. Your cattle make it through winter." Hank reined in. Ivy rode 3 more steps before stopping. He did not block the wash, did not reach for her reins. He sat beneath the cottonwoods, broad shoulders still, hat held low against the morning light. "You are deciding for all of us," he said. "I am preventing harm. You don't know that. I know what staying costs." "So do I." She looked at him then. His face was tired, more open than she had ever seen it. "Ivy," he said, "give me one chance." The words were quiet. Not an order. Not a promise he could not guarantee. Just a man asking her not to leave before they had learned what staying might become. She searched his face for pity. There was none. For obligation. None. Only fear held carefully behind restraint. Ivy dismounted. Hank did the same. Slower, as if one sudden movement might send her back into the saddle. She walked toward him. He said nothing. She took the front of his coat in one hand, rose onto her toes, and kissed him. Hank went still, then one hand lifted to her cheek, careful, almost uncertain. The kiss lasted only a moment, but when Ivy stepped back, neither of them was standing where they had been before. "That was not an answer," Hank said softly. "It was the answer I chose." They rode back to Coyote Bluff together. At sunset, Sheriff Ed Cooper arrived carrying a folded order sealed by the county court. Hank opened it on the porch. The paper declared all Coyote Bluff property temporarily frozen pending investigation into disputed land claims. No cattle could be sold, no loan renewed, no parcel transferred. Silas had not forced Ivy away, so he had decided to take the ranch with her still inside it. The court order lay open on the porch table while the last light drained from the hills. Sheriff Ed Cooper remained near the steps, hat in hand. He looked tired in the way honest men looked when required to deliver dishonest paper. Hank read the order twice. Ivy read it once. "The petition claims Coyote Bluff benefited from disputed water rights," she said. Ed nodded. "Crowder's attorney filed it before noon." "Benjamin Foster?" "He signed as county counsel." Hank folded the order along its original's crease. "What happens now?" "No cattle leave the property. No land changes hands. The bank cannot renew your note until the hearing." "When?" "Monday morning." 3 days. In Arizona heat, 3 days could kill cattle if water failed. It could ruin a ranch if creditors were already waiting. It could give a man like Silas enough time to turn uncertainty into surrender. Hank handed the paper back to Ed. "We'll be there." Ed glanced at Ivy. "Bring everything." "We will." The sheriff mounted and rode toward Redstone beneath a sky gone purple over dry mesa. Hank remained by the gate after the hoofbeats disappeared. Ivy stood beside him. Neither mentioned Cottonwood Wash. The kiss had not solved the banknote, the forged deeds, or the order threatening everything Hank had built. It had only taken away the lie that either of them could still leave untouched. "What do you need?" she asked. He looked toward the southern pasture. "Time. That is the one thing Silas is trying to take." "I know." She waited. Hank turned back toward the house. "Then we stop giving it to him." Before sunrise, the dining table disappeared beneath paper. Ivy opened the iron-bound chest with Hank's key and arranged its contents into years, owners, and filing dates. Martha brought coffee in a dented tin pot and set down biscuits wrapped in a clean towel. Caleb sharpened pencils with Hank's pocket knife and copied names onto narrow slips of paper. No one spoke more than necessary. Outside, ranch hands moved cattle closer to the central troughs. Leather creaked. Gates struck their posts. The windmill made its slow, tired turn above the yard. By 8 o'clock, Ivy had found the first pattern. "Look here." Hank bent over the table, one hand braced against the wood. 3 transfer deeds lay side by side. Each belonged to a different ranch. Each had been filed in a different year, but the corrections had been made with the same dark blue ink, written in the same narrow hand. "Benjamin's writing," Hank said. "I believe so. Belief won't hold in a hearing." "No, but dates might." She placed tax receipts beside the deeds. These owners paid county taxes after the dates they supposedly surrendered their land. The county accepted the money. Caleb looked up from his copying. "Why would they pay taxes on land they didn't own?" "They wouldn't," Ivy said. "Then the transfer dates are false." Ivy met Hank's eyes across the table. "Yes." Caleb lowered his gaze again, but his pencil moved faster. By noon they had 6 ranches. By sunset, 9. Every disputed parcel touched either Cottonwood Wash, a seasonal creek, or an old survey line leading toward underground water. Silas had not been collecting land at random. He had been building control of the valley, one filing at a time. The next morning, Hank rode out to speak with the families named in the records. Some opened their doors, others did not. At the Miller place, an old woman produced 14 years of tax receipts from a flour tin beneath her bed. At the Keene Ranch, 2 brothers admitted Silas had threatened to call their grazing loan unless they signed away the Eastern Wash. Near Dry Mesa, a widower named Walter Boone showed Hank a fence line that had moved nearly 30 yards during one winter. Each had believed his loss was private. By afternoon, 5 ranchers had agreed to attend the hearing. 3 refused. Fear had long roots. When Hank returned, dust covered his coat, and his horse was sweating heavily beneath the saddle blanket. Ivy met him at the pump with a cup of water. "How many?" "5. That is enough to begin. Not enough to finish." She held out the cup. "It never is at the beginning." He drank, then handed it back. Their fingers touched. Neither moved away at once. Caleb came running from the direction of the north field. "Hank!" Something in the boy's voice changed the air. "The upper trough is dropping." Hank set the cup down. They found the problem half a mile from the house. The irrigation ditch feeding Coyote Bluff had been cut where it narrowed between 2 banks of stone. Water poured uselessly into a low patch of sand, darkening the ground but never reaching the cattle troughs below. The cut was clean, made by tools. Hank crouched beside it and pressed 2 fingers into the wet soil. "Fresh," he said. "How long?" Ivy asked. "Less than an hour." A horse track led east, then vanished among the rocks. Caleb kicked at the dirt. "I should have seen him." Hank stood. "You were checking the trough, not guarding a border." "I could have—" "No." The single word stopped him. Hank rested one large hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You found it before the cattle did. That matters." The boy looked down, jaw tight. Then he nodded. Hank turned toward the ranch hands gathering behind them. "We need canvas, shovels, fence posts, and every empty grain sack in the barn." Garrett Miller, one of the neighboring ranchers, stared at the damage. "Crowder's asking for a fight." "He's not getting one," Hank said. "He cut your water. So we repair the water." No one argued after that. For 6 hours, men worked in the heat. They packed sandbags against the broken bank, drove posts into the channel, and stretched heavy canvas beneath the weakened soil. Hank stood waist-deep in muddy water, lifting stones that took 2 men to drag. His size made the work look easier than it was, but Ivy saw the strain gathering in his injured shoulder. She carried water from the wagon and recorded which ranch supplied each tool and sack. When the temporary wall shifted, she noticed the current eating beneath its southern edge. "Stop packing the top," she called. "The water is cutting under it." Hank looked where she pointed. Then he ordered the men to open a narrow relief trench along the higher bank. The pressure eased. The wall held. By late afternoon, water began moving toward the troughs again. A cheer rose from the younger hands. Hank did not join it. He climbed out of the ditch, soaked to the waist, boots heavy with mud, and checked the flow twice before allowing himself to sit. Ivy brought him coffee in a tin cup. He looked at it. In this heat? Martha says you become unpleasant when tired. Martha says many things. She is usually right. He accepted the cup. A thin line of mud crossed his cheek. Ivy reached toward it, then hesitated. Hank noticed. He leaned slightly closer. She wiped the mud away with her thumb. His eyes held hers. Around them, men gathered tools, horses stamped at flies, and the restored water whispered through the channel. Nothing private could remain private for long on a ranch. Garrett Miller cleared his throat loudly and carried a shovel in the opposite direction. Hank's mouth moved. This time it was a smile, small, real, gone before most people would have seen it. Ivy did. The hearing opened Monday at 9 inside the county land office. Every chair was occupied. Ranchers stood along the walls. Townspeople gathered outside the windows. Sheriff Cooper remained near the rear door, arms folded, watching Silas's hired men more closely than the proceedings. Silas sat beside Benjamin Foster at the long table. His coat was dark gray. His collar was clean. Nothing in his appearance suggested he had spent the previous days closing credit, moving fences, or cutting another man's water. Hank entered beside Ivy. The crowd shifted instinctively to make room for him. He took a place behind her rather than beside her. It was a small decision. Silas noticed it. So did Benjamin. Ivy set her folders on the table. The territorial clerk opened the hearing by reading the freeze order aloud. His voice was dry and slow, turning possible ruin into something that sounded almost ordinary. When he finished, Silas rose. "This is a simple matter," he said. "Miss Turner arrived with an invalid inheritance claim. Mr. Dalton interfered with a lawful correction. In doing so, he exposed his own ranch to review." Ivy waited until he sat. Then she stood. "May I ask Mr. Foster a question?" Benjamin looked at the clerk. The clerk nodded. Ivy placed 3 deeds before him. "Did you prepare these corrections?" Benjamin adjusted his spectacles. "They appear to carry my notation." "That was not my question." Silas turned slightly toward him. Benjamin's fingers rested against the table. "Yes," he said. "When?" "The filing dates are written there." "I asked when you wrote the corrections." A murmur passed through the room. Benjamin looked down. "I don't recall." Ivy placed the tax receipts beside the deeds. "So, these ranchers continued paying taxes after the dates you claim they transferred ownership. Your office accepted those payments. Either the county collected taxes on property they no longer owned, or these dates were added later." Silas rose. "Speculation." Ivy did not look at him. She placed another document before Benjamin. "This ink was sold by only one stationer in Redstone. Mrs. Dunn's account book shows your office began purchasing it in 1883. She pointed to the transfer date. This deed was supposedly corrected in 1879. The room went silent. Benjamin removed his spectacles. For the first time, he looked less like a lawyer and more like an aging man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long. Silas leaned close enough to speak without the clerk hearing. Benjamin heard him. Ivy saw the color leave his face. "What did he promise you?" she asked. Silas turned toward her. "That is enough." "No," Benjamin said. The word came quietly. Silas stared at him. Benjamin put his spectacles back on, though his hands were no longer steady. "It is not enough." He stood, gathered his papers, and walked out of the hearing. The crowd erupted. The clerk struck the desk with his gavel and ordered silence. Silas demanded the freeze remain in place. Hank did not move from behind Ivy. though every line of him had become still. The hearing was suspended until the following morning. Outside, the heat pressed down on Redstone. People gathered in clusters beneath the boardwalk awnings. Ranchers who had refused to support Hank now avoided Silas's eyes. Mrs. Dunn crossed the street and handed Ivy a copy of the stationer's account without being asked. Silas descended the land office steps alone. He stopped before Ivy. "You think paper will save you?" "No," she said. I think truth might. Truth belongs to whoever can make it stand." Hank stepped forward, not between them, beside her. "She's standing," he said. Silas's gaze moved upward. For one brief second, the polished calm slipped. Then he put on his hat and walked away. Benjamin came to Coyote Bluff after midnight. Caleb heard the horse first. Hank opened the door with his revolver lowered at his side. Benjamin stood on the porch, sweating beneath his coat. Though the night had turned cool, he carried a narrow leather ledger against his chest. "I should have brought this years ago," he said. Hank did not invite him inside. Ivy came into the hallway, fastening her robe at the throat. Martha lit a second lamp. Benjamin looked at Ivy. "Silas did not merely ask me to correct mistakes. He paid me to create them." He held out the ledger. Ivy accepted it. Inside were dates, parcel numbers, payments, and instructions written in Benjamin's own hand. Beside each disputed ranch was a notation describing water access, grazing value, or pressure to be applied. Banknote, tax lien, fence dispute, no heirs. At the bottom of one page appeared her aunt's name. Ruth Turner, refused third offer, prepare transfer after illness. Ivy's fingers stopped. Hank read the line over her shoulder. The room changed around him. Not loudly, but Martha set down the lamp. Benjamin looked toward the floor. "I kept the original filings in a separate drawer," he said. "Silas learned of it last year. Thomas Bell helped me move them." "Where is Thomas?" Hank asked. "Alive, I hope. Silas found out Bell meant to testify. I warned him to leave the territory. You let us believe he was taken." "I was afraid." Hank's hand tightened once at his side. Ivy closed the ledger. "Where are the original filings?" Benjamin looked at her. "Devil's Gap, in the abandoned assay office beneath the western ledge. Thomas hid them there." A horse thundered past the front fence, then another. Hank stepped onto the porch. Far beyond the yard, two riders moved south under the moon. Caleb appeared behind him, fully dressed now. "One of them came from the bunkhouse," he said. Hank turned. "Where is Silas?" Benjamin's face emptied. "He knows I took the ledger." Sheriff Cooper arrived at dawn with news from Redstone. Silas Crowder's hotel room had been stripped clean. His safe stood open. 3 horses were missing from the livery. "He's running," Ed said. "No," Ivy answered, holding the ledger against her chest. "He's going for the original filings." Hank ordered Caleb to remain with Martha while he, Ivy, and Ed prepared to ride for Devil's Gap. Caleb objected once. Hank placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "This is not punishment." "I know. It is not because I think you're weak." Caleb looked toward the saddled horses. "I know." "Then stay where I know you're safe." The boy gave a reluctant nod. They rode out beneath a hard white morning sky. Devil's Gap lay nearly 4 hours south, beyond broken ridges and a dry cattle trail few people used outside winter. The heat rose early. Dust coated their mouths. By noon, the rocks around them shimmered. They found the assay office empty. The floorboards had been pried up. The hollow beneath them held torn paper, splintered boxes, and one blackened match. Silas had reached it first. Ivy dropped to her knees and searched through the scattered pages. Most were copies. Some had been ripped in half. A few original county seals remained intact. "Not all of it is gone," she said. "There is enough here to support the ledger." Ed looked toward the trail. Horses came in. Only 2 went out. Hank studied the ground. A third set of tracks led west into the narrowest part of the canyon. Then a rider appeared on the ridge above them. It was Garrett Miller. His horse was lathered. His face had gone gray beneath the dust. "Hank!" The sound echoed from stone to stone. Hank stepped into the open. Garrett rode down too fast and nearly missed the turn. When he reached them, he did not dismount. "Caleb's gone." Hank did not move. Garrett swallowed. "Silas doubled back to the ranch after you left. Took the boy from the South Camp Road. Left this tied to the gate." He handed Hank a folded strip of paper. The message contained only one demand. "Bring Benjamin's ledger to Devil's Gap by sunset. Come with the sheriff," and the boy disappears into the desert. No one spoke for several long seconds. The desert wind moved through the mesquite, carrying fine dust across the trail between them. Hank folded the note once, then again. He handed it to Sheriff Ed Cooper. Ed read it without changing expression. "He wants us divided." "He wants the ledger," Ivy said. "No," Hank answered quietly. "He wants us to believe the ledger matters more than Caleb." Garrett removed his hat. "I should have stayed closer." Hank looked at him. "You stayed where I told you. But this isn't yours to carry." Garrett lowered his eyes. The words were simple. That was why they landed. Hank untied the leather satchel holding Benjamin's ledger and placed it over his saddle horn. Then he looked at Ivy. "You stay behind me." "I'm not staying behind if Caleb needs me." "I know." "You know? I've stopped trying to guess what you'll do." A faint breath almost became a smile. "Good," she said. They rode hard across the broken country toward Devil's Gap. The canyon looked different in the evening. Long shadows stretched across the stone walls. Heat still lingered in the rocks, though the air had begun to cool. The abandoned mining camp sat beneath the western cliff, its weathered buildings leaning toward one another as though sharing old secrets. Hank raised one hand. Everyone stopped. He studied the ground. 3 horses. Ed nodded. "They're waiting." "No." Hank pointed toward the ridge. "They've posted lookouts." Ivy followed his gaze. A brief flash of sunlight reflected from metal high above them. A rifle barrel. Silas had chosen his ground carefully. One narrow entrance. High stone, no easy way around. "Can we circle?" Ed asked. Hank shook his head. "They'll see us." He turned toward Ivy. "How well do you remember the survey maps?" "They've been in my head for days. The wash behind the assay office." She closed her eyes for one moment. "There used to be an old drainage channel." "Where?" "North side. Wide enough?" "For one person." Hank nodded once. "That's enough." Ed looked between them. "I don't like splitting." "You don't have to." Hank's voice stayed calm. "I'll keep Silas looking at me." He removed the ledger from the saddle, then opened it. Slowly. He tore out several blank pages from the back, folded them into the leather cover, closed it again. Ivy understood before anyone else. "The real ledger?" He handed it to her. "Keep it hidden." She slipped it beneath her riding coat. The empty cover returned to the saddlebag. Silas would see only what Hank wanted him to see. They entered Devil's Gap at sunset. Silas Crowder stood exactly where the canyon widened before the abandoned office. Clean coat, dust-free boots, as though he had come for a business meeting instead of kidnapping a 14-year-old boy. Caleb sat against a wagon wheel 20 feet away. His wrists were tied. He looked tired, not frightened. The moment he saw Hank, he straightened. Silas smiled. "Mr. Dalton." Hank stopped several yards away. "You have the ledger." "I do." "You came alone?" "No." Silas glanced toward Sheriff Cooper. "I expected as much." His smile never reached his eyes. "I suppose we'll overlook that." Hank looked only at Caleb. "You hurt?" "I'm fine." "You hungry?" "A little." Hank nodded once. We'll fix that. Silas laughed softly. I always admired your priorities. They're simple. They'll also cost you. Silas extended one hand. The ledger. Hank removed the leather book, held it where everyone could see, then stopped. Caleb first, Silas sighed. I expected bargaining. I expected honesty. Silas motioned to one of his men. The rope around Caleb's wrists fell away. The boy stood. For one brief moment, no one moved. Walk, Hank said. Caleb walked, not running, exactly as instructed. Halfway across the open ground, one of Silas's men shifted. Hank saw it. So did Ed. So did Ivy. The rifle was lifting. Down! Ed shouted. Caleb dropped instantly. The shot struck stone well behind him. Everything happened at once. Hank threw the false ledger toward Silas. Silas reached instinctively. The book struck the dirt. Papers scattered into the wind. Blank pages. Silas stared. What? Caleb reached Hank. Hank caught the boy with one arm and pushed him behind Sheriff Cooper. Then everything changed. Silas realized he had been deceived. His face hardened. Take them. 4 hired men rushed forward. Hank stepped once. Only once. The first man reached him. Hank caught the attacker's wrist, turned him aside, and the man's own momentum carried him harmlessly into the sand. The second stopped before reaching him. Seeing Hank standing there was enough. No shouting, no rage, only certainty. Ed drew his revolver. Nobody else. The canyon echoed with his voice. 2 of Silas's men lowered their rifles. The other 2 looked towards their employer. Silas reached inside his coat. Not for a gun, for folded legal papers. You think this changes anything? He shouted. I still own every one of those claims. No, Ivy said. Everyone turned. She stepped forward, holding the real ledger. The only thing you ever owned was fear. Silas's face changed. You. She opened the ledger. Benjamin's handwriting covered every page. Payments, false filings, survey changes, names, dates, amounts, every fraud, every lie. Ed stepped beside her. I'll be taking that. Silas looked toward the canyon wall, then ran, not toward the trail, toward the narrow drainage channel behind the assay office, the very passage Ivy had remembered. He'll get out, Garrett shouted. No, Ivy was already moving. That channel collapsed years ago. She sprinted toward the ridge above it. Hank followed. Silas disappeared into the narrow cut between the rocks. Seconds later, he reached the blocked end. Solid stone. Nowhere left to go. He turned. Hank stood at the entrance. Neither man spoke. Silas slowly drew his revolver. Hank did not. Sure. You'll have to shoot. Hank remained still. I don't have to. Silas raised the weapon. Before he could aim, Ivy's voice echoed from above. Look down. Silas glanced toward his feet. Loose shale. The slope beneath him had begun sliding under his own weight. He stumbled. The revolver slipped from his hand and disappeared into the rocks below. Sheriff Cooper entered from behind Hank. It's over. Silas looked from one face to another. At Hank, at Ivy, at the sheriff. His shoulders finally dropped. Ed stepped forward and secured his wrists. No struggle, no more speeches, only the quiet sound of handcuffs closing. As they led him away, Silas stopped beside Ivy. You've ruined everything. She met his eyes. No. You did that yourself. The ride home felt longer. Caleb rode beside Hank without saying much. Halfway back, he finally spoke. I knew you'd come. Hank looked at him. I said I would. I know. The boy reached into his pocket. He unfolded a small wooden pencil Ivy had given him during one of their evening lessons. I kept it. She smiled. I can see that. I figured if I still had homework, I'd probably make it home. No one answered for a moment. The desert sunset painted the cliffs gold. When Coyote Bluff finally appeared beyond the cottonwoods, Martha stood waiting on the porch. She walked straight to Caleb, placed one hand on his shoulder, then quietly turned away before anyone noticed the tears she refused to let fall. Weeks later, the county court restored Ivy's land. Every fraudulent filing tied to Silas Crowder was overturned. The water beneath her property remained hers. Instead of selling the land, Ivy and Hank dug a community well that supplied several neighboring ranches during the dry months. The old storage barn became a small evening school. Caleb hung the first painted sign himself. Children arrived carrying slates beneath their arms instead of cattle ropes. One warm spring evening, after the last lesson ended, Hank found Ivy standing outside the main house watching the sunset spread across dry mesa. He placed an old iron key in her hand. She looked at it. "The front door." He nodded. "I don't have a ring." "I know." "I don't have flowers." "I know. I've only got this place." He hesitated. "The first chance was mine to ask for." He gently closed her fingers around the key. "The rest is yours to choose." Ivy looked from the key to the man standing before her. The giant cowboy everyone feared, the quiet man who had never once tried to decide her future for her. She smiled, then placed the key back into his palm. "Then I'm choosing home." They were married at Cedar Chapel before neighbors who had watched every hard mile of their journey. The school remained open. The wells never belonged to one family alone. The ranch survived. And every evening, as the Arizona sky turned amber above Coyote Bluff, Hank Dalton and Ivy Turner sat together on the front porch, saying very little. They no longer needed many words. The most important one had already been given, a chance. And both of them had chosen it. Years later, people in Redstone would still remember the sight of Hank Dalton standing beside Ivy Turner beneath the evening sky, his broad shoulders quiet, her hand resting near his on the porch rail. They had both known what it meant to be misjudged. Hank had been feared for the strength he worked hardest not to use. Ivy had been treated like someone whose future could be written by another person's hand. But love did not rescue them by erasing the past. It gave them a reason to face it without turning away. Ivy chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Hank chose restraint when anger would have been quicker. Together, they proved that a home is not made by land, walls, or a name on a deed. It is made when two people are free to leave, yet decide to remain. Maybe that is the hardest kind of courage, not fighting every battle, not carrying every wound alone, but trusting someone enough to offer them a place beside you, and respecting them enough to let the choice remain theirs. What would you have chosen if you were standing at Cottonwood Wash that morning? Share your answer in the comments. And if stories of courage, healing, and unexpected love still have a place in your heart, subscribe and stay with us. There are many more journeys waiting beyond the next ridge, some mysterious, some painful, and some capable of leading lost hearts home.